Greetings, YouTube. Alan Lube here. I literally just woke up to the ban is suspended announcement, and I am in utter shock with what just happened. So I'm just gonna. I've already seen what's got hit and banned and suspended, but I'm just gonna go through the article now and go through their reasoning and all that, and basically react along with you guys. I am shocked, to be honest. So yeah, let's get right into it. Please like and subscribe. I was planning on actually just recording like a ProQuest tournament report today, but this is gonna need to take priority. And then I guess after ProQuest season, I'll probably be doing a calling tier list too for my expectations on the meta. But yeah, this is not what I expected at all. Okay, so the ban is suspended announcement was originally scheduled for January 30th. And then, due to the calling indeed taking place very soon, they decided that to give players more time, they're going to give it to us today, give it to us early. But these changes are only effective after ProQuest Season 3. So, the last weekend of ProQuest, these changes won't happen yet. So, they talk about their philosophy using the ban is suspended as threefold. Sometimes we use it to address card interactions that are degenerate and create negative play experiences, for example, like Drone of Brutality. Sometimes they mess up, sometimes it's to actively manage the format, and today it's to actively manage the format. We do want to note that we actively consider removing cards from the ban is suspended as a way to manage the formats, and you can expect to see some ebb and flow over the coming months and years. The ban list is not a one-way street. Okay, that's as expected. So first up, Belittle is banned. This is decently big. I think that, well, first of all of the like Belittle Briar decks that use like the 3 or lower cost cards or 3 attack or lower cost cards with like spellbound creepers and stuff isn't going to be a thing anymore. You're basically going to see more regular, quote unquote, regular Briar or Royal Briar from now on. Fi getting hit with Belittle is pretty big because it was a mainstay in a lot of versions, but I still think Fi is strong without Belittle. But obviously, of course, the biggest hit is that he can't easily he doesn't have an easier time into Icelander because of the Belittle package anymore. But I'm not sure how big of a deal that will be moving forward. So let's see. Second off, Winter's Wail is banned. I am super surprised Winter's Wail is banned. I think of all the ways you could hit Oldhim, Winter's Wail is probably the biggest surprise. At this point, your only options are Sledge or Titan's Fist. And Titan's Fist kind of completely changes how Oldhim decks need to be played. Like, you can't just pitch whatever card you want. You have to pitch cards with 3 costs or greater to get that 4 attack. And Oldhim decks in general don't focus on 3 plus cost cards the same way that Bravo does. No Winter's Wail means no consistent Frostbite. I'm just in utter disbelief at this ban, to be honest. I don't think anyone expected this. But yeah. Next we have Amulet of Ice and Hypothermia is suspended. These are both hitting Icelander, and I think this is quite big. Amulet of Ice is one of the best ways for Icelander to sort of like play that traditional Ice Eternal Frost-Tex combo play by stripping resources from your opponent's hand. Now without Amulet of Ice, it gets really awkward because you kind of need your Insidious Chills, and they're much harder to play, requiring 2 cards and 3 resources. Hypothermia is also another huge one. It was a big card that you played against Fi or Dash, Aggro Boost Dash, or even Briar to sort of stop their turns. So Icelander lost one of her best tools to combat defensive decks, and Icelander lost one of her best tools to combat aggressive decks. So basically, Fi, and to a lesser extent, Belittle Briar, Oldhim, and Icelander all got hit pretty hard. So let's go into their reasoning before I talk about my thoughts. In this most recent ProQuest, hero representation was the most diverse we've ever seen. Despite this diversity, 3 heroes dramatically outpaced the field in terms of conversion rates, win rates, and total number of Pro Tour invites secured. If this were the first season of dominance for these heroes, we'd be inclined to look the other way and allow the metagame to adapt. But after all, we are not in a 3-deck metagame, and none of these heroes have play rates that are problematic. However, they just felt that at this point things felt too stagnant. Furthermore, we recognize that our ice heroes can occasionally create polarizing experience where one player has an inordinate amount of control over the flow of the game. It's important that these strategies remain viable, but we do not blame anyone for wanting to play against a few less frostbites. Simply put, Oldham, Icelander, and Vi have been on top for too long, and all three are a long way off from living legend status. It is time for a change in the classic constructed format. So I do agree that while the meta has been diverse, I think since sort of around nationals time of last year, once Michael Hamilton kind of broke the format with his Icelander deck, the game has kind of felt the same. And I recently watched Fabled Hunter's video where Yuanji was also talking about this, but a big reason for that kind of feels as though Dynasty didn't really shake up the meta a lot. And I don't necessarily mind that either, because like if Flesh and Blood was a card game where you had to keep up with every single set because something's broken comes up in every single set, it would kind of not be great. I do like that they kind of just gave, a few strong tools, and then a lot of the cards like, point towards future design and future decks. It's just increasing the card pool while not making something obviously broken, kind of like with Starvo. So I think their way of using the ban list currently to kind of shake it up, I don't mind, just because I don't want Flesh and Blood to be an even more expensive game where it's like, oh, every set you kind of like there's 3 new classes on top and you kind of have to play them and you got to get all these old cards. It's like it's a weird balance, but at the same time the ban list also makes it hard for players because if you were a Fi, Oldham, or Icelander spammer since you started the game, and now seeing them banned definitely hurts. But overall, I still think they're good decks. But it's gonna be interesting to see what happens. Winter's Wail is too strong for a one-handed Guardian weapon. Tales of Aria represents a set where boundaries were pushed, clearly, with like Duskblade. And as we learn more about Flesh and Blood, it has become increasingly clear that Duskblade was not the only majestic weapon that went too far. Winter's Wail has an impact on the game equivalent to, if not greater than, many two-handed weapons like Anathos, Romping Club, Nebula Blade, and Sledge. It brings that output to the table while also carrying with it a Rampart, Stalagmite, or Arcane Lantern. There needs to be a meaningful cost to playing a one-handed weapon given how much value your offhand provides as a Guardian. In hindsight, the value of shields wasn't priced correctly to Winter's Wail's final form. It is too easy for an attack from Winter's Wail to change the swing back damage equation by a disproportionate amount. Oldham's ability to keep a 1-card hand and offer 4 damage while potentially mitigating double digits of damage on an opposing turn has been at the core of his broadly favorable aggro matchups. Oldham without Winter's Wail still offers a hearty challenge for aggro decks based on best in-game defensive options as well as a bevy of crush and ice effects. We expect Oldham decks will have to adapt significantly to this change, but in no way do we expect Oldham to disappear from the metagame. So I have no idea what to think of this change, to be honest. While I do agree that Winter's Wail was one of the best weapons in the game, banning it kind of throws a whole loop in my mind about how Oldham has to play. I don't necessarily think Titan's Fist plus Rampart is viable. I mean, to a degree, all the Fatigue Oldham style decks could still play Fatigue Oldham style decks if you just ran Titan's Fist instead. Like, you're not really worrying too much about dealing damage if you're fatiguing. But in terms of like an Oldham that wants to be a little more aggressive and play like, big detrimental effects, a lot of ice stuff like Stalagmite, Titan's Fist kind of sucks. So not being able to swing Winter's Wail for Frostbite is pretty bad. But I don't know. And then Sledge is like, you could run Sledge in Oldham. It's like somewhat equivalent to Anathos, but not really. And I think Sledge is okay. I'm not sure. I don't have too much experience with Oldham, more so playing against Oldham. And I don't really know which, as a Guardian player, I don't really know which one I would rather play against, Sledge or Winter's Wail. It just feels like I have to approach the game a little differently when I see those two weapons. But in terms of how Oldham will attack the meta as a whole now without Winter's Wail, it's I don't even know. Yeah, I think if you see an Oldham at this point, you're probably more concerned about a fatigue style Oldham with Titans plus Rampart, because the disruptive Stalagmite Oldham builds with Titan's Fist, I think they just lose so much by having to run Titan's Fist. But maybe it'll be okay. Stalagmite is still a really broken piece of equipment. So yeah, I don't know. I'm kind of happy at this point, or I'm a little happy because on one hand, Bravo stonks are going up, but at the same time, this change is really really big and kind of unexpected. Hypothermia and Amulet of Ice. Icelander has not been quite as dominant as Oldhim this season, but as our world champion has proven, there's nothing scarier to see across the table than a great player behind a waning moon and an ice wizard. Icelander has effective game plans into virtually every hero, and it would be challenging to bring the deck back to the field with only a single alteration. Therefore, we are targeting some of her best tools for both aggro and control. Okay, makes sense. With Hypothermia and Arsenal, Icelander feels virtually invulnerable against decks that rely on bestowing Go Again to their attacks. With a single free blue card, turns are routinely stolen from Briar, Dash, and Fi. Hypothermia can undo multiple turns worth of setup and planning by an opponent. Likewise, Amulet of Ice allows Icelander to sculpt a perfect opportunity in the late game at very little deck building cost and almost no output cost, given that it is free to play and has Go Again. The fact that Amulet of Ice is routinely part of Icelander's plans against aggro as well as control really tells you all you need to know about its power. When it is still worth playing a card with no block value against extremely potent offensive strategies, there's really no risk-reward proposition around Amulet of Ice. It is simply all reward. We much prefer if Icelanders that wish to set up these card denial game plans are forced to do so at a higher cost on something on the back of like Insidious Chill. Yep, makes sense. We expect these suspensions to last until Icelander attains LL, but we will check in the next BNS to make sure that they are affecting both Icelander and the format in general in a manner that is consistent with our goals. So Icelander being hit is not a huge surprise to me. I think I never really thought about what they would hit this ban is suspended, to be honest, because while the meta has felt a little stale, for the most part, it still feels quite diverse, but that's also because it is at the pro quest level. I think out of calling, you're kind of more likely to just see a ton of Oldhim Icelander. So I think it makes sense that they got hit, but I'm still pretty surprised with these Icelander hits. Having to play Amulet of Ice in order to like OTK, like a Guardian or other decks that can be more defensive seems pretty rough. Three Insidious Chill triggers is 6 resources, and then you have all your Frostbites and stuff. But even then, it feels like if your opponent runs an E-Pot, they can kind of just fatigue you, or like 2 E-Pots, because I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. It's weird. I feel like Icelander probably got hit. Well, no. I think Oldhim and Icelander both got hit the hardest this ban suspended announcement, which I mean, I think is okay, but I do think I worry that the next season after these bans will feel a little more varied, simply because I think we're going back into like a heavy aggro meta. But it is what it is. Let's move on to Belittle. I think this is probably the least surprising one. I think people have been saying ban Belittle for a long time. People say, it breaks core tenets of the game. It's a 1-for-3 Go Again, and then you get 3 extra resources, or, a +3 buff on red minnowism in like Briar, for example. They just thought it was too good. And I was like, okay, that's fine with me. Despite taking multiple strong anti-aggro tools from the format, we have no desire to just hand the keys to the castle over to Fi. There may be fewer Frostbites in the future of Classic Constructed, but the absence of Belittle should mean that the ones that do show up will be more effective. Furthermore, removing Belittle lowers the ceilings on Fi's output by producing fewer virtual 6 and 7 card hands. It is also a ban directed at the long-term health of Flesh and Blood. At generic, it's too easy for aggro decks to default to Belittle Minnowism as their foundation, and when they do so, the unique nature of their heroes is de-emphasized. Belittle Minnowism as a resource engine also diminishes one of the unique elements of the Flesh and Blood game system and its deck construction considerations: the trade-off between impact cards and cards that produce resources. Belittle fetching BLU Blue Minnowism allows decks to cheat on their resource base, increasing threat density, output consistency, and leading to less instances of interesting game states where players have to make the most of blue-rich hands. This is the kind of variance that adds to the dynamic ebbs and flows of the games, or to the gameplay that we like. Belittle has featured prominently in 5, Viserai, Briar, Katsu, and countless other brews over the history of our game. Belittle engine decks won both Pro Tour New Jersey and Lille, We're excited to see a more diverse world where Go White heroes are forced to explore other options. So this is the least surprising ban to me. But it does make sense that if they only hit Belittle, it would kind of just be an ice format. So they hit Oldhim and Icelander really hard as well. I think that all things considered, even with the Belittle ban, Fi was probably hit the least hard. Simply because Belittle was sort of a tool for you to. It was at its best when it was a tool for you to combat ice heroes, but now that the ice heroes were hit really hard, I think Fi can still perform extremely well. I do think Belittle was a core of the deck even without ice heroes, just the extra resources allowing you to do crazier things on your turns with like Art of War plays in that was pretty big. Or if are on a Tunic build, then you can like Tunic Belittle to get resources and fix your hand. I don't know, either way. I think Fi after this change might just turn into the de facto best deck in the format again, or maybe Dash will pop up because like all these ice heroes got nerfed, and so maybe Boost Dash is going to be more popular now. I don't know, we'll see. Crown of Seeds, notable for its absence in the BNS announcement. Crown of Seeds deserves its own discussion. We are not blind to the fact that a tremendous portion of Oldham's power lies in the card filtration and damage prevention of Crown of Seeds. Certainly, in many scenarios, Crown of Seeds would have hit the bench in CC a long time ago, much like it has in Blitz. However, we recognize what the legendary acquisition process means to a Flesh and Blood player. Many of us at LSS still look back fondly on the first legendary we ever opened from a pack, and we use them in our decks happily and proudly, taking every opportunity to share the card's history with our opponents. We take the bond between a player and a legendary seriously. That is not to say we will never ban a legendary card. We will always do what is best for the health of the game when it comes to the ban and suspended announcements, but we will exercise a greater degree of caution when it comes to legendary bans, and we absolutely view them as a last resort. Given internal testing as well as cards releasing in Outsiders, we believe Crown of Seeds should remain part of Classic Constructed at this time. So a big reason they didn't ban Crown was because it has the legendary tag. It's a more expensive card, and they're more hesitant to ban it. I think it's fine. There are other ways to attack Oldhim, like how they did with Pulse of Eisenloft, which I think was quite effective. Not only at reducing Oldham's power level, but also sort of like making it so players had to explore more avenues of playing the deck, which I thought was cool. Winter's Will is a big nerf, but Crown would also be an even huger nerf. But I think the absence of, or I think them not banning Crown is fine, honestly. I think even without Crown, Oldhim could probably still adapt, but without Winter's Will, I'm just like extremely surprised. But yeah, Briar and Living Legend check. The reason this BNS announcement was originally scheduled for January 30th was so there's a Living Legend check. In the unlikely event that Briar or any other hero happens to cross the 1,000 point threshold in the final weekend of ProQuest, she will attain Living Legend status as if this announcement was made on January 30th. Okay, that makes sense. Usually they make the announcements at the end of a season, and they also announce any LL changes in that time. But with Calling Indy being so close, they're like, oh, we'll tell you now. If Briar also gets enough points, then she'll be bye-bye. But it's unlikely. Briar hasn't performed like amazingly at ProQuest. She still gets wins and stuff, and still does well, but not racking up points at the same rate as like Starvo last year. I mean, they also reduced the points you get from ProQuest, but yeah. Blitz, no changes. Okay. Next ban is suspended is March 20th. I think that's the Outsiders release, but yeah. So I'm just shocked, to be honest, that all these changes happened. I think the format, I honestly don't know what to think about the format, because Fi, Briar, and Dash already made up a large portion of the meta. And I expect them to make a large portion of the meta at like Callings or even Pro Tours. But it felt as though a lot of like I don't want to say the best players, because there are some really good players on like Fi, Briar, and Dash, for example, but a lot of like the popular players that you see who do well routinely at events usually seem to go more towards decks like Oldhim or Icelander because of how powerful they are and how much sort of control you have over the game. But with Ice being hit this hard, I have no clue what'll happen to the meta. Maybe like Dorinthia pops up out of nowhere and just starts wrecking everybody, or maybe Arachne Fatigue becomes the new best deck. No, well, no, more aggro decks will be back. So maybe Dory Stonks go up because she can race aggro, or maybe Bravo Stonks go up if Fi becomes the de facto next best deck. Um, but yeah, I'm pretty shocked with these changes. Overall, I'm not too mad about them because it's not like I play any of these heroes anyway. So, but I could definitely see people being unhappy with the changes. Well, one little note, I think people talked about wanting Remembrance to be banned recently. I don't know. I don't think it's necessary. Like, probably the most degenerate play pattern right now that Remembrance gives you access to is Warhorn Remembrance into blowing up items like Oldhim versus Dash. But at that point, as Dash, can't you just, find a sideboard slot for Remembrance and just bring back your items at that point? I don't know. But yeah. So that was my little banner suspended recap. Yeah, I'm still shocked. I'm gonna go eat some food. Bye bye, YouTube.